Hello, hello, hello. We are live and we're here for another Leadership Edge episode. We are conducting the series here, and today's topic is navigating the future, obviously, of the work and how is this impacting through this Executive Leadership Roundtable, when we have a chance and opportunity to interact with all of you that are watching and listening, which we're super eager to have you joining us. But today's topic is going to be definitely one that I know it's on top of the mind of everyone, which has to do with mental health and well-being, specifically from lens of leadership. So today in studio, it's my co-host here, Larae. How are you this morning?
It's a great morning. I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona, and the weather is beautiful. So it's great to be here with you all.
Fantastic. And greetings here from sunny Denver as well. We're super thrilled to be this Saturday again with you all so that we can have this very important topic covered through multiple different lenses. Obviously, we have Larae that is had not only tremendous impact and implication as former agent working for Federal Bureau of Investigation, but also being involved with so many other agencies and understanding where just so much of the pressure and so many variables affect not only your well-being, but of course your mental health. And then from my lens, someone who not only ran a nonprofit organization that was focused on providing mental health services, among others, for individuals that undergo so much of trauma and issues and different conflicts and war zones, also some of the military, as well as obviously individuals that are being impacted through their work in most recent years through different avenues. So to deep dive today into mental health and well-being, let's start focusing on truly what well-being and wealth of knowledge related to that means to all of you. And we have obviously already Cindy joining us. Thank you, Cindy, for being with us again. She's joining us, I believe, from Texas, right? So I'm glad that you were able to be part of it us as well, or actually you in Arizona or somewhere in Arizona, if I can recall correctly. So it's great to have you.
Welcome, Cindy.
So, Larae, when we think about well-being, I know that doesn't always come as the first line of conversation, right? So, do you mind shed some light? Why is that?
It's interesting, but you're absolutely right. Nobody starts a conversation about their well-being. But, I do think that the words well-being and wellness are often confused, or they're used interchangeably, but they mean two very different things. Wellness, it describes a lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, whereas well-being, so it's mostly about, healthcare and preventing illness. That's wellness. But well-being is a broader concept that really includes, your mental and your physical and your emotional health, but it also includes things like life satisfaction, happiness, and fulfillment. Well-being can include elements outside of health, such as workplace well-being.
I'm so glad you shedding some light and distinction, and because I think it's so very important. And right now, when I feel like so many people are not only overwhelmed with their day-to-day work and day-to-day to life in general, that's kind of the last thing on their mind, because it's almost like it's a survival state for a lot of people, and doesn't necessarily always have to be because of finance or a job or everything, but just the nature, how much more we're doing and how things change. So do you mind sharing a little bit what happened in the recent years, specifically in the last 5 years, that is definitely alarming, and that why we have to change how we perceive everything?
Well, absolutely. And of course, we look to social media, we look to the internet, we look to all those things that makes information just, there at our fingertips. But actually, well-being is something that has been a concern since way before COVID. And we like to blame COVID for a lot of the things that are going on as well. But in reality, this is something that has been concerning things like burnout, things like being overwhelmed by just life, trying to work your way through, your job and then also home, and keeping that balance. I think the thing with well-being is that it encourages us to seek the positive things in our life's experiences. And it's more than brief periods of happiness. And the whole issue of well-being, it's a broader notion of fulfillment, whereas work, a lot of times, it's just all about the bottom line. It's all about, what is the profit margin? And actually, I think in yesterday's Wall Street Journal, there was an article that a lot of tech companies are pulling back because they've been so focused on profit that the quality of the work is suffering, as well as the well-being of their employees. People are just experiencing burnout. So, I just think, like, for example, when my first job out of college just sucked the soul out of me.
Mhm.
And my degree, turned out to be more of a coupon with an expiration date than a ticket to this fulfilled life. I didn't prosper at any level, and it really began to affect my mental health. It didn't get real serious, but I had thoughts of suicide, because if this was as good as it got, I didn't need to suffer through the pain of living a crappy life. And I come from a cattle ranch in Wyoming, and when an animal was in pain or suffering on our ranch, my dad brought out his Remington 30-06 rifle and put the miserable beast out of his misery. So likewise, I needed someone to put me out of my misery. But it just took me a while to realize that someone would need to be me. So.
I'm so glad you're sharing that, because a lot of times we're not being taught to really figure it out, to how to recognize these changes. And as Pauline, our colleague, mentioned here, that how important it is to also have that strong mindset, a positive mindset, which we definitely agree, Pauline, with you as well, of the behavior that are very important in experiences, to be well-minded, as well behaved. When we are doing well, then we can do that. We can then be well-minded and well-behaved and well-interact and have that sense of positivity. But when we don't know what's going on, we don't recognize the symptoms because we're for first time experiencing it, or first time experiencing the level and magnitude of all of that. It's very hard unless you're trained professionally to pick on that. And a lot of times we're also very good at hiding it, right? Because it's like over the years, we're masking so much the level of stress, the level of burnout, level of anxiety, all of those little symptoms that start creeping up and adding up and adding up and affecting us in so many ways.
Yeah, absolutely, Izabela. I think you just really bring up a good point. And I remember reading, because I being overwhelmed and burnout is just an issue that was here in the workplace way before COVID. Because I was reading a study, and it was like in 2018, before COVID ever hit, and it found the overall rate of burnout around for general U.S. workforce was about 30%, and that was before a lot of this stuff had happened. And I think burnout, which is sort of one of the symptoms of a lack of well-being, it's hard to. Burnout is a little bit like true love. It's hard to define, but when it smacks you in the face, you've been hit. And so the World Health Organization actually defines burnout as a phenomenon driven by chronic, unmanaged stress. And as you point out, I think we all feel it in different ways, and we can blame it on different things, and that's legitimate. But like in the example I just gave, for me, at some point, I had to be the one. No one else could save me but me. I just needed to recognize the symptoms, and I needed to drill down to figure out why I was experiencing it and when I was experiencing it. And for me, it was a job that just sucked the soul from my life. So, there's a lot of different reasons. And the real challenge, I think, Izabela, is for all of us to kind of do the hard work and figure out what that is.
I'm glad you're bringing up some of the points also in the data, but also how this was from your personal experience. And I remember when I had my first burnout, actually, when I was part of that rehabilitation of the genocide, torture, war, trauma survivors, when I thought like I'm invincible, I'm young, I've been through this, I understand, I know. And then everything kind of come up in one moment as a big, huge swoosh shift that I didn't realize. It's like, oh my God, how has it been affecting me? Because it's not something you immediately pinpoint, right? Even though I feel like I'm very much so aware of, and I see this all the time in our patients and our clients and in team dynamics, but I did not recognize with myself. So which really brings excellent point here that when we were talking about burnout, recent Gallup study shared that 28% of leaders report frequent burnout. That is a very high percentage of leaders specifically that are leading currently organizations, obviously today, which just really shows in contrast that about 18% individual contributors feel burnout, which means that obviously it's much more prevalent around the leaders. And that's why we want to address this topic from multiple lenses, right? So it's like, how is this affecting leadership? And obviously if it's affecting them that much, and as they say, everything comes from the top. Obviously, how is it going to then create a ripple effect on the talent, the rest of the team? But it's really interesting, something I want to also kind of contrast a little bit with the mental health here. And it's really been shown that mental health as a business, it's imperative. We know that, right? But if we're not operate on that well-being foundation, how is this going to now show and reflect? And it's interesting to say that 5 times, obviously the health initiatives that had a 5 times better employee engagement are obviously the ones that had a 25% higher retention rate based on obviously executing effectively mental health initiatives in their organization.
Yeah, this is a good point. You know, when you talk about mental health and you talk about burnout, the symptoms, and I will admit and confess, I felt depression when I was in this other job and things were just not going right for me. But the symptoms between burnout and depression they can be confused.
Yes.
But they're very different things. I was experiencing burnout really rather than depression, but because burnout can imply a person is questioning the significance of or the impact of their profession, which is what was happening to me. Depression, on the other hand, can leave a person questioning the significance of themselves.
Yes.
They feel overwhelmed by just about everything.
And I love the distinction. And honestly, it's possible to have both, right? And that is very hugely showing that it's like, oh my God, I'm failing personally. I'm also failing professionally. I'm not sure what I'm doing. And then that also, if you don't have a very good, healthy environment, very quickly can deteriorate, specifically for strong women leaders, deteriorate self-confidence. How do you show up? And are you ready then to do your job? And do you feel like you have the right support, right tools, and frankly, are you capable? And as we already know, even just from gender perspective, women tend to be more, we want to be more sure, more certain, while men are like, okay, let's just wing it and see what happens. And that attitude also can hold us so much back. And sometimes that's also leveraged as advantage for a wide range of reasons. And that could be very detrimental. And I just want to quickly acknowledge here beside, obviously, Cindy that joined us, which is fantastic. Pauline that was already mentioning and sharing some of her great insight. Excellent to have you here. We also have Ataria, and she's mentioning something, and she's joining us from Finland. She's a psychologist. She has been involved in so many different organizations right now with different focus, but of course always brings herself. And I love what she says. So true that when you are, what you're saying about the fact that you need to understand yourself first. So self-awareness is really important. So thank you, Taria, for sharing that. And ladies, if you have any specific questions, additional comments, please bring them on because we want to also interact with you. But back to you, Larae, what you just said. with that distinction, do you mind sharing what you see, what is contributing that we are really seeing unprecedented statistics in terms of when well-being is offset and when mental health is an alarming large scale, detrimentally impacting people? Obviously, it's affecting everyone in some way, in one way or another.
Well, absolutely. And if we're still talking, we're talking about the symptoms, I guess, of burnout and being overwhelmed. And the things that I have found is that burnout really has two significant indicators. One is exhaustion, and the other is cynicism, which I know I experienced, to a great degree. So when we're tired, we go on vacation, we get a few extra hours of sleep, and the symptoms are alleviated. Exhaustion, however, means the body can't keep up. And this is when it becomes a serious health issue. Exhausted people feel anxiety, and they find it hard to do the really basic things that keep their life afloat. Whereas a second symptom of burnout is cynicism, which is even more troubling than exhaustion, because cynicism reflects a lack of trust, either in the workplace or perhaps the world in general, which I see that a lot right now in our political and economic environment. It's a defense position. Cynicism is a defense position we take to protect ourselves. We start to seek out and we focus the worst in other people. And it is really a negative filter. Again, positive thinking is so important. But the thing is, don't stay in denial if you are experiencing burnout. If you recognize the symptoms in yourself, get help. This is where, Izabela and I are not therapists, but what we can do is point out the symptoms. And when you recognize these symptoms, get professional help. Because one of the best ways, particularly with cynicism, is that you talk it through. Now, this won't make it magically go away, but you need to find ways to bring your honest emotions to the surface, because only when you confront them can you start to pull them yourself out of the gloom. And the other thing is that unsustainable workloads. This is where the organization, and again, it starts at the top. Burnout is actually the fallout of just chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed by leadership. And so it makes it clear that burnout is it's not an individual problem. It's an organizational problem that requires an organizational solution.
And such an important segue to what you said. It requires obviously organizational solution. It requires that culture that is willing, open. That is just not enough to provide an app or provide somewhere out there type of service, right? It's also very important to acknowledge what do we do as an organization with all department, including human resources as well, rest of the organizations, to truly honor and understand. And I think we picked up a lot of negative habits during COVID. As we were working remotely, that really I have clients keep telling me, Izabela, we never have a time off because we're so always by computers at home. It's now expected that we're going to be reading 24/7 emails and messages, and we are constantly on. Even though we're at home, we don't feel like we have ever that task switching or role switching or pausing, which really brings another point. Is like, how much do we really then exhaust ourselves just from that, because we're not giving ourselves valuable break that you mentioned earlier. But it's really interesting. I want to throw this out here, but Ernst & Young really come up with a survey that they said that CEO and mental health relationship, and they looked at that 84% of their not their CEOs, but CEOs in general, when they did assessment, they acknowledged the mental health issues impact leadership decision. So think about also, if you're making very important decision, regardless what industry you're in, and let's say you're in a very important first responder industry or healthcare, or simply you are making decisions that are going to impact millions and millions or billions of people's lives, right? And then that 50% of those 84 were having thought and they were seeking professional support. Question is that support being obviously good for them? And are they able to as a result, make a better decision or not. And why I'm bringing this up is because, as you mentioned earlier, financial implications are huge, why we're doing what we're doing. And I'm glad that they finally recognize if we're just focusing on bottom line financially, we're killing everything else. And that bottom line is going to be harder to obtain, right? So this is really interesting thing from what I'm seeing dynamic in terms of talent and team engagements, that over 200 million lost work days are attributed due to lost productivity. We're talking about, from employees, we're talking that they can range between 17 to 44 billion dollars lost due to obviously lack of productivity, because we might be logged in, we might be present physically, but we may not be there emotionally, mentally, and we definitely may not be there productively.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Izabela. And you mentioned a word earlier, a term. You said multitask. And I've been thinking about that as you're talking, and about how there is so much emphasis on productivity and the bottom dollar line. Companies have to stay in business. That's not arguable. But the way they stay in business is what we're talking about.
Yes.
And a lot of these initiatives have to be brought in from the top down, because leadership sets the tone. And I would encourage, I don't know if we have any entrepreneurs out here, or those.
Yes, I do actually.
Oh, good. Because you are the one that's going to set the culture. That entrepreneur is going to determine the culture of that company. So I'll just give you an example. Organized and multitasking doesn't work, first of all. But let me just tell you, I was in counterintelligence and espionage agent for the FBI for like over 24 years. But the last 4 years, I was the spokesperson for the FBI in Northern California. And they were the busiest days of my career. Now, but when I entered the world of public relations, I encountered just the onslaught of tight deadlines and demands that just never let up for 24/7 for 4 years. I mean, it was 24/7. So the environment was very intense. And lunches were optional, as were bathroom breaks. I mean, we've all been, I think, in those situations. Yes. You have too, Izabela. And one would think that, in this type of situation, that the ability to multitask would be something very desirable. But science has proven that multitasking is not effective for higher level tasks where the brain needs to be engaged. Now, if you're driving and you're talking to someone or whatever, those are just like parallel processing for the brain. But when you're dealing with high level tasks, which most of us here are, multitasking doesn't work. And the reason is we think we do. We think we multitask. I mean, we think we do because we can do, more things at one, do more than one thing at a time. But it's interesting. The word multitask was actually published in 1965, and it was used to describe an IBM computer. It was never meant to refer to human tasks, but we've tricked ourselves into thinking we are computers and that we can handle all these different things simultaneously. But what we're really doing is switching rapidly between tasks. And so it's called switching, and switching costs, because it taxes your brain to recall information on one task and then put it aside to recall information on another and then repeat the whole thing over again. But your brain can switch quickly. So sometimes it feels like you're multitasking. But what's really important is you do need to switch between tasks. Don't make the switch if it's really important. That's the main thing. Focus on the one critical task in front of you. And if there are other pressing deadlines, and we all have multiple deadlines during our day, you can't just say, I'm going to dedicate. Izabela, I know you have the same issues where, you've got phone calls coming in, you've got a report to get out or whatever. But give yourself a time frame. Really, what experts recommend of how long to spend on each important task. And we're all going to get interrupted, right? We all know that. And so we have to kind of count, include those in. But for the most part. I don't know, do you find that helps you, Izabela, and how you organize your busy day?
Absolutely. Multitasking is definitely exhausting brain much faster. Definitely we need to fuel it. We need to take up breaks, but we also multitask. We're not fully present either in the conversation right now, or we're not fully present with people that we're also responding to. So it really shows then lack of focus, right? And we don't bring up the best version of ourselves. So to me, executing on the highest priority is always the key, and then doing things one at a time. And then also working in a smaller segment so that I also feel like I'm moving forward, I'm accomplishing, I'm not stuck, I'm tackling my list, I'm not putting 100 things so I feel overwhelmed. I have only 2 or 3, and then I'm gonna pick up another 2 or 3 tasks that needs to be done. But the beauty is all that is like that sense of accomplishment by the end of the day. It's amazing. And then also lifts that extra layer of anxiety and stress that often we see. And based on even what, thank you for joining us, Bill Dolan, you were mentioned earlier also about entrepreneurs here, and he's obviously one of the many entrepreneurs that are here on this call, which obviously he's validating the how often we're stuck in the wrong mindset and outdated beliefs, things that we thought that were right. And the same thing for Tyra, as is mentioning, how it differentiates that also. And obviously, how do we do with our workload? We also have another LinkedIn user that is saying us, hello, thank you so much for joining us. For some reason, your name is not showing up, so let us know who you are, but we're super thrilled that you're here with us. Then on same token, I wanted to also see what we're having. Specifically, we have here perspective from Dr. Pauline, our colleague here, the women are multitasking as an innate and a natural talent. That's so true. And that's also a reason that tasks are how they lead with them. That's a great point here. And then also what we want to really say here is everything you mentioned obviously starts with that. Like, how do we tackle our day, how we plan for that day, how we execute that day, right? But how we also make ourselves available to others, what interactions we allow, because at the end of the day, we're in control of these devices. And right now, what I'm doing which is really tremendously helpful, and I want to share this little hack with all of you, is I have instrumental music in the background, and I'm so uber focused on what I'm doing. When I'm done with that, it's like, okay, one thing, and I celebrate. Then I take a 5 minutes walk, shift the gears, take a water or go to the bathroom or whatever might be the case. And then I come back and say, okay, now I'm ready to tackle something else. And then my energy movement and just shift really brings completely different perspective to the table as a result, right? So I just want for everyone to really understand that. But also one piece that I'm seeing that is problematic with all of this is if we're not also checking in, not only what's going on with us, now we're talking about us, right? But we're not also checking in to see what's going on with our theme. We're going to have a really big, huge awakening and rude awakening in all of that, because it's like, if we're not paying attention, is how quickly something is getting done, how well is something getting done, why somebody is making spelling errors, or why somebody is given the work that is truly below the acceptable quality. Some of those indicators could really be great conversation, instead of telling them what's wrong and what we don't like, to really understand what's happening. Are they overloaded? Why they're not able to focus? What else is going on with them? I think it's so important to really pay attention to people and their dynamics that we're sometimes not even aware of, like often we are not, and then somebody else brings up to our attention.
No, absolutely. And you used, I totally agree. We need to check in with people, because it's still communication. And we talked about emotional intelligence last week. That's always going to be your first approach. But you used a word earlier, and you said you put down your list. And, as a former FBI agent, theories are nice, evidence is better. So I've done a lot of research into neuroscience, but this thing about lists, you just mentioned that. And I just wanted to, our brain, neuroscience tells us our brain loves lists. They are the most effective way for the brain to receive and organize information. anytime the brain has to hold more than 4 important things, again, we're talking about higher level. If you have to do minor tasks, you can, handle more than that. But if you're talking about more of a higher level performance and projects that are coming across your desk, there's only about 4 things that the brain can really keep at the forefront. And so, but it always wants to be on it, right? So this old-fashioned to-do list that you mentioned earlier, you can cross it off your list. A list frees up space in your brain for the more important tasks that need to be accomplished during your day. And our brain has an attention filter.
Yes.
And so urgent matters will always be at the forefront. But at the same time, our brain doesn't forget those less important matters either. And it won't hesitate to remind you, say, about 3 o'clock in the morning. But if you have a to-do list, your brain can rest because it knows you're on it. And the other thing that I just find fascinating, I just want to share it with our listeners, is that according to research, again, our brain processes information spatially. So it's easier to remember if we write down the information line by line in bullets or numbered points. And this is much more effective for our brain to incorporate all of this than just writing it in, say, a paragraph form. And that people remember like lectures better. This is done in a school, Stanford, I believe, where the people remember lectures better when they take handwritten notes rather than typed ones. So when we write down our priority, the brain processes the information as we write it. So I say, write your paper list in pencil so you can erase and update your priorities as your day changes, because it will change. That's just the dynamics of life today. And actually, it probably has always been dynamics. We're just more aware of it now. Somebody mentioned self-awareness. It all comes down to self-awareness and how you're spinning. And if I mispoint, it's called neurogenesis, where our brain cells, our brain actually grows new cells. And further digging into neurogenesis, you're talking about moving, Izabela, how getting up and going for a walk and that kind of thing. Neurogenesis tells us that we foster new brain growth through exercise. So, I mean, we have these circadian rhythms that are just natural. And in about every 90 minutes of doing something intense, we need to get up and just get out there and do something different.
That's excellent. And I cannot agree more with you, because unless we step away, we then cannot really, obviously, we could stay in that state that is going to then create a languishing and create a more and more burnout. And as a result, also create a more pain points. And also, how do we show up? How do we perceive how well we do? And then also how much we fall behind and how much we feel like that we accomplished. And I love that you mentioned also back to that to-do list. But what I also love on the end of the day to say, oh my God, look at it complete.
I know, and me too. I love
that, right? It's like, oh my God, I really did so many milestones. And then I feel like that is that high performance day. And I feel so empowered, because it's like, wow, now that I'm accomplished, how can I treat myself? And that's the thing, is like, oh, now I can afford an hour and a half or 2 hours walk in the nature and go to the park or the mountains or whatever. Or I can now do extra X, Y, and Z. And that feels like now it's like that beautiful reward that you can truly then just enjoy the nature and enjoy the workout, whatever it is, without feeling guilty, because you don't feel like, oh, I have to rush back because I have more things to do. And as a result, then you affect your cycle of sleep and rest and everything else. And I'm seeing so many people, they say, Izabela, I'm bringing out that everybody's been asked to, for most part, come back to office. I'm bringing now work to home. I don't have a home life. I don't have a business life. I feel like things are getting out of hand. And now we're seeing this very gloomy data. But before we go into that, I also want to acknowledge the question here that Dr. Pauline shared with us about prioritizing in a burnout period. So what is truly important to do for me to do right now, which is fantastic. And also listening to, in those situations that we can fix in order to for us to be and stay in control, which is really a combination of both. And I think that's really brilliant. Do you mind sharing your perspective on that before I dive into a few other components as well?
Oh, no, I totally agree. And sometimes that's where a lot of the cognitive dissonance, if you will, but the push-pull kind of thing comes when your priorities don't necessarily mesh with the company's priorities or your boss's priorities. And so we get a lot of that cognitive dissonance going on as well. And that has a really negative impact because you have been given a task, you have to do it. In your mind, you were going to do something else. In your mind is more important. So we all have these we all have to juggle and learning how to do that. And what we're doing today, I think, Izabela, is sharing some hacks that will just help people, when they come to work and they've got this workload ahead of them, and they do seem overwhelmed at one point. There are things that we can do, and these are just sort of hacks that we are sharing with one another, and how people can put this in perspective without letting it affect our well-being.
That's so again revolutionizing, in just because it's the most complex problems that I always say we find it in simplicity, and then a lot of times our brain just rejects it because it's like, no way, this can be so simple, right? And but it's like, just because it's simple, is it really easy? It's also a combination of that too. And why often things are not as easy is because the way we already are kind of pulled in, right? It's like what's expected of us, or
Right.
how we're asked to, how to show up, and then really brings so many issues here that how many organizations are not really fostering those bridges within their culture, within their organizations, with their departments, to truly fully understand that a lot of coworkers are working in different time zones, that it's a lot of these delays, but also that we have also cultural norms, and that in different cultures we have to honor different things. And then what is that overall arching culture, and then what's happening specifically when we're dealing with right now, when we see this fine line between that loss of well-being and switching into that mental health pain, right? And then also the mental health problems that are now so absorbent, and that they're leading that for that thin line between a life and death situation. And why I'm bringing this up, I don't want to hammer again with more statistics, but we really definitely need to understand and comprehend why is this so alarming, and why we need to normalize mental health issues. It's too late when you lose your well-being, right? But it is also when you're in that state when your mental health is being affected, and where you now either need to take a medication, but you don't feel safe and secure to bring them to work or able to do them at work, which a lot of people now have to do it, and organizations don't have provision to make that happen. That's one of the biggest issues why we've seen people again calling sick, relapsing, going in hospitals, and having one of the largest actually financial bill is related to mental health. It used to be some other chronic illnesses, but right now we're seeing mental health related issues that are putting, when I did a recently analysis for a couple of companies, mental health was one of the major expenditure of regards to their health coverage. Well, are you surprised? I personally am not, because we see that disconnect again. Bottom line, financially, we have the technology here that we're pushing down. We also have some processes, and we always neglect aspects of people. So just to put in perspective, if we have a 23% of US adults experiencing mental health in the past year, just in past year, meaning 2023, that is affecting nearly over 60 million Americans. And those Americans are part of the workforce today. So how is that acknowledged and addressed, right? Also, that we have over 5% reported experiences, seriously thoughts of suicide, as Larae earlier mentioned, and what that means to them, right? Highlighting the urgent need for mental health support beyond apps and just wait list or speaking to someone professionally. If environment doesn't change, no matter how great medication and conversation with psychiatrists or psychologists might be, you're gonna just feel constantly, exposed to things that trigger you. And why I'm bringing this up, we see new phenomena that is happening with young adults, which I want you also for you, Larae, to help out from your research to really understand for our audience, why is this happening when we're having young adults, in addition to actually men over their 55 or 60 years old being affected, not only with serious thoughts of suicide, but also that we're seeing beyond obviously military personnel, specifically the veterans, right? Right now it's alarming 22 veterans, they committing suicide due to issues that are not just related to mental health, but how we approach it, how we treat it, how we make it accessible, how effective it is, and how we as a leaders position our talent, our teams to be successful while they're dealing with these issues.
It's a broad topic here. Again, well, if there is well-being, whether it's started with the company, which I think all entrepreneurs and startups really need to build that into their culture. What is well-being? It's going to be the satisfaction. It's going to be that you find value in your work. You mentioned the military, and they've brought in a boatload of psychologists to help them understand the PTSD and the issue that you brought up with suicide and mental health problems. And they came out with a clear set of issues that are important. And one is you have to have some kind of support, whether it's family, your squad, your work environment, your friends, your church group, whatever. It's important to have a cadre. You don't have to have hundreds of them, just 2 or 3 good friends that support you. That's very important. The other thing that I found that in my research and in my own experience is something called values. So as an FBI agent, I quickly learned that the needs of the Bureau would always come first. So whether it was transfers or assignments or caseloads, they were just handed out with little or no consideration with how they would impact the agent. We were given jobs that often seemed impossible to fit into our day or week or whatever, when there were little regard to the number of hours required to complete this case or come to a logical conclusion or a prosecution. But yet morale was always high. And sure, we bitched and moaned about the inconvenience and joked that we'd crush under the weight of all of our responsibilities. But here's the thing, our values as agents were in alignment with those of the FBI. And as a result, our well-being really never suffered, even when working 24/7 on a child abduction, a terrorist threat, or building firewalls around a sensitive computer system. And these were essential investigations. And the results really mattered. Our well-being never suffered because we believed in this mission to protect American citizens. I mean, we got it right more often than not. We're not perfect, but that is the overarching goal of this organization. Again, FBI, fidelity, bravery, and integrity. Those were my values. So, as well as the Bureau's. So I think that when you talk about well-being in a work environment and for leaders, it's important, first of all, that you know what your values are. I am working with an organization right now as a consultant, and they wanted to offer a leadership seminar, I guess, or a series of seminars. And we just looked at their organizational structure and said, you know what, you have no business trying to tell other people how to run their business or how to be good leaders, because you're not good leaders. It comes down to what are your values and how are you projecting them into the workplace? You know, and psychological well-being means that we're mature enough. We talked about emotional intelligence last week. Psychological well-being means we're mature enough to look at a situation from another person's point of view. So, I mean, we value something I value things. But naming our values isn't as easy as it sounds, because it really requires us to closely examine what governs our behavior. And I'm not telling people or suggesting that you quit your job. However, it's important that you find something of value in the work you do, because if you can't find that, you will experience burnout. You will feel overwhelmed. You will slip, because you start with well-being, and if that's not there, mental health is sort of the result of poor well-being. And we can have mental health problems without experiencing, issues from the workplace. But by and large, what we're talking about in this conversation is the mental health that is the result of poor leadership, the result of poor values, the result of focusing on productivity, which is important for the bottom line, but your employees are also very, very valuable. So I think it's important. I think somebody mentioned, or maybe you did, Izabela, well, we need to check in with people. I mean, and ask ourselves, as well as those people around us, our colleagues, our friends, whatever, what gives your life meaning? That's what it all comes down to. That is well-being. What gives you joy and well-being? And it better be more than just happiness, because there's so much emphasis these days on happiness. Don't you agree, Izabela?
Absolutely, and I love that how you also brought it up, component and to connecting the dots for everybody watching and listening, that we obviously have to do individually whatever we can to be our best selves for ourselves. As a result, we're going to show up better for everybody that we encounter, specifically the ones that we're working on daily basis, right? But as a result also of these horrible statistics, we will have to really look at, why is this not working, right? Where is the root cause of all of that? And we know that it always starts with the leadership. Tool itself will not solve the problem. Process around will not solve the problem if we are not demonstrating and walking the talk that we are honoring environment of well-being, environment where mental health is not looked at as a taboo and threat, but also as making it normalized and part of working environment with safeguards that are in place, and also level of support that is essential and much so needed. And what I'm seeing, as you mentioned, that you're right, is like it's like teaching a leadership, and you poor leader. I see this all the time. Right now, we're seeing with so many companies, because they're so grabbing market share, exposure. For example, this race with AI, for example, everybody wants to be the greatest, the best, and a go-to. But in reality, it's like, if you're not having your labs and your own environment of innovation and different way of thinking and being and doing the business, it's going to show up that it's just a bunch of theory, and that doesn't help, right?
No, I love how you said it just results in tyranny. And that is so true. I mean, so when the thing is, when leaders invest in the employee well-being, they signal that they care about those employees and whether or not they're flourishing. And maybe not every employee will share your values or of that of the organization, but when you place importance on their well-being, you show respect for what is important to them. Again, it gets back to emotional intelligence. And to make it easier for you as a leader, I always encourage leaders or entrepreneurs, those in startups, start with the hiring process to ensure that the people you hire are not only competent, that's important, but savvy about what is important to them. Not you right now, but what is important to them, because they are going to act out on their own values. So when you lead yourself and you lead your company with the right values, and you clearly enunciate them, the rest falls into place. Because, in today's changing workplace and an environment, a landscape, it's not uncommon for several generations to be working together, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And it's a reality, and each has different expectations, and perhaps they have different values as well. So, I mean, that's something a leader has to balance, or a manager. They have to balance that, and to bridge those gaps. it's important to let them know you care about how they're doing. So I would suggest that I understand productivity. We all understand the paycheck. We have to have the paycheck, but it's important, outcome only metrics, but you need to round that out with other kinds of performance measures and seek out former employees. This is what I've always found. Seek out former employees, those who have left, who can give you an honest account of your workplace. You're going to get some honest answers there. Does well-being matter? Or is it just you as a leader or the organization playing lip service? And also help your employees think more deeply about the consequences of their action or their inaction by creating an environment where these things can be discussed. And I don't know. What are your thoughts, Izabela?
You're spot on, because something has to give, right? And you mentioned earlier how creating a culture, different culture needs to happen, but I feel like it's a two-pronged approach, right? Creating culture of mental health awareness first starts with awareness and also a well-being awareness, right? And then from there, it's also how do we now well-being focused leadership strategies. As you know, as a strategist, I already think in 10, 15 steps ahead and what really needs today, but when we really needs to change. And then also being as a change agent, obviously, even when we have a great strategy, if we're not adopting and changing in the right way, it's going to fail. So we need to look at those two components. That's going to be a driver and vehicle, right? But only way when we truly create, again, that supportive culture and prioritize what's the most important. And how do we do? I love what you said earlier, the values that everybody resonates with. So you have organization values are overarching, but we're talking about the value now. How do we come together to bring all the best of that each one of us can offer, so that I know I have a sense of belonging, and how do I fit, and how am I valued as an individual, and the value that we're creating collectively. And when that is in place, I find this phenomenal, obviously, growth and opportunities when we have a very different conversations, when we encourage specific dialogues, but also we also have a very different opportunities to implement not only those mental health, for example, KPIs, which is, I think, very important to track progression and keep organization in the good health check, right? But also well-being check, then understanding where can we be flexible? Where can we actually be flexible? Specifically right now, as we're seeing many organizations literally put in the mandates for everybody to come back to office. Full-time, 5 days a week, not anymore hybrid, but actually full-fledged, full-time. Right. And that is already affecting people that have already issues with their well-being and mental health. It's already has so many reverse implications. And we already see not only just pushbacks, but we're also already seeing lower performance, more absences. And really, for a lot of organizations, it's creating a lot of negative PR, and then also a lot of people making choices in decision transition. We also seen companies that executed this flawlessly when they said, we would love to have you back, and this is why, and this is what we're creating, so that they can look forward to it. It's also about communication, the messaging, and then walking the talk, right? So if we promise and overpromise, but constantly underdeliver, that doesn't look good. That optics very clearly, very quickly scrutinized, and as a result, obviously affects not, as we just mentioned, leadership, but obviously everybody, but frankly, customers. Did you notice how much also in some areas customer service deteriorated as a result of it, and how much we as end users are also unhappy? Because everything kind of in a way snowballs, doesn't it?
You bring up I think a very interesting component of well-being, and actually that is positive versus negative thinking, because we talked about the negativity and it can just spiral. And I'm a big believer in positive thinking. But let me just say, the FBI never made an arrest without taking into consideration everything that could go wrong. We were just being realistic, right? But there's a real dangerous trend right now in, I say literature, but it's the junk that's out there on the internet primarily. But
Yes.
it encourages us to suppress anything that's negative or make us uncomfortable. I mentioned happiness briefly, but we're told, the thinking goes like, to live a good life, pursue happiness and avoid things that make you face your own mistakes or your own regrets. Then if you breathe deeply and focus only on the positive, all that negative stuff in life will go away. Well, I tell you, coming from a cattle ranch in Wyoming, that holds a whiff of some crap that I would have stepped on in that pasture. Because, I mean, it's dealing with our emotions, and that is what brings us down into this mental health issue. We are depressed. I love your stats, and thank you so much for collecting that, because it's just so enlightening. And as you were talking, I'm just going, wow, that's unbelievable. But a lot, and I've done not as much research, but from what I can tell, a lot of the mental health issues that we're facing do have to do with depression. And for a myriad of reasons. But when I dig down into some of the research behind, and this is not, there's the chemicals in the brain that cause depression. That is a mental health issue. Okay. And I think that's something sort of separate from what we're talking about. We're talking about where well-being has been violated. And as a result, we're compromising our values. We get into this negative slump, and that's where we stay. We stay in this rut. And I always say that the difference between a rut and a coffin are the dimensions. So, we don't need to wallow in the negativity, but we do need to engage in negative thinking to just explore what else is going on in our life. And when we're talking about research, we're talking about all emotions have something to tell us. We need to pay attention. A negative emotion gets our attention. We need to understand why. Now, it can be just our ego, I wasn't promoted, and that's just, whatever. It can be just ego, but it can also be something else. It can be something that's going on with you and the way you're perceiving your situation. So we need to pay attention to what's going on, what brought about that negative feeling, that negative reaction. And so a psychologist really encourages to label that emotion for exactly what it is. I didn't get asked to do something recently, and I was really upset. And the more I thought about it, it was just my ego. I mean, there was no reason for me to get worried about it or go into a funk about it, because it was just my ego. That's what it came down to. And that can be kind of hard to swallow sometimes, because, we're all human, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you are looking from also that holistic perspective of self-awareness. And I'm also glad to have quick here comments that our great guests and participants shared here. Taria shared that is very important to also have a sustainable solutions when a whole organization is involved. We also had a fantastic comment here that when we're talking about the outcomes and values from Bill, which is great, and he's a serial entrepreneur who really is creating some great work and helping our organization, but also had his own personal story and wake-up call and how he's as an entrepreneur actually is doing this right and well, because both of us have seen this, how it's done poorly, right? And then we also have an opportunity where we're seeing here that it's the conversation that, thank you so much, Pauline, that is also highlighting here importance of that healthy ego. Yes, we all have an ego. Question is how healthy it is, and then what do we do with with this, and then how do we actually learn from it. And guess what, guys? It's already bringing us almost close to the top of the hour, and we're really
we can continue this conversation for another hour.
This insanely important topic. But what I really wanted to have a major takeaway and recap from everything that we were sharing today, I know that everybody watching and listening knows or experimented, it has a wealth of knowledge, and some of us are still experimenting, finding the better avenues and ways. And what we found that really works is creating these really strong, beautiful labs where the innovation can flourish, when we can approach it as an innovative collective solution, where we have a better collaborative efforts, where we can truly be vulnerable and share what is really bugging us, what we see it's not working, so that we can fail fast and correct quickly and get in the right direction. The same way we should be approaching as we're looking for innovative solutions, in my opinion, based on what I'm seeing as the strategic efforts for the change, either as technologies or processes or any blend of those, we should have the same approach when we're looking at our well-being and mental health. What's working, what's not working, which scenario this is applicable, how can we make it happen, how can we make it better, and do it in that agile, innovative sprints where we can truly quickly come to that finish line. Ultimately, what it means, finish line of that hour of that meeting or that very uncomfortable situation that is anxiety infusing, or a lot of unknown, who is maybe going to be let go of, who is going to be restructured or being obsolete with their position, whatever might be scenario, or things that are going to be impacting at day or at that week or at that month. And frankly, right now, as we're diving into last quarter of 2024, we have a tremendous opportunity to look at what are we doing also to make all of those deadlines happen. And this could be perfect opportunity to test out what Larae was mentioning, to preserve and create that wealth of self well-being, and then constitute that well-being across the organization, and then also manage the mental health aspect as well. Anything that would you like to add in closing, Larae?
No, well said, Izabela. And thank you for a great discussion. Well-being is so important.
Absolutely. And again, as well as mental health. And I just want to make sure for everybody watching and listening, we wanted to thank you again for showing up, for being here with us. And we cannot wait to hear other topics you'd like to see and hear. We have few hot topics prepared that we're super excited. We'll make it in the comments and we'll share with you. And we cannot wait to see you next Saturday with your favorite beverage and conversation that continues, because we want to make sure that everybody has chance and opportunity to also be supported and find avenues so we can collaborate together.
Thank you so much.